Wargamers, today I want to start our discussion of the new Tyranids Codex. It's come out and I'm really excited to start picking this apart and going through it unit by unit. So that's what we're going to do over the long term. Today, the first step, of course, is talking about the Hive Fleet adaptations, since they're going to determine a lot of your strategy and the pros and cons of each unit within a detachment. So we'll start today by talking about the Hive Fleets, and then going forward we'll go into some more detailed things like psychic power, stratagems, and then each unit piece by piece, talking about the adaptations you're going to want to pick with them and the war gear, things like that. So that's the plan. Before we get into anything though, I want to say thanks for watching. If you like this video, go ahead, hit the like button and the subscribe button. That way you don't miss any of my upcoming 8th edition content, including continued coverage of this book here. So, alright. Basically, I want to do this by breaking it into 3 different groups. There are largely 3 different types of gameplay that are favored by the Hive Fleet adaptations. There's a defensive group, a melee offensive group, and then a shooting group. So we'll go through those sequentially, but if you're unfamiliar with how Hive Fleets work, basically every unit every unit in the Codex has the Hive Fleet keyword, and that is going to basically trigger the Hive Fleet adaptations that we're talking about. So you replace that keyword with Leviathan or Hydra or Kraken, and now they have that keyword instead of the Hive Fleet categorization keyword. So pretty straightforward, but everything in your detachment for a Battleforged army has to have this same Hive Fleet keyword in order for you to get that benefit. So you're going to be having, a single battalion detachment of Leviathan or a single spearhead detachment of Chronos. That's going to be your strategy or your setup for your army going forward. You're not going to have one unit within a detachment that's one Hive Fleet and another unit within the same detachment that is a different Hive Fleet. And I think that's an important point, something that can easily be forgotten if you're going through this too quickly. So keep that in mind. Alright, so like I said, let's start going through these piece by piece. Starting with the defensive adaptations. Now, I think these benefits are actually fairly easy to assess. With the offensively geared adaptations or the offensively geared Hive Fleets, it's harder to tell exactly what the numerical benefit of those adaptations are relative to each other. But from a defensive standpoint, we know what the profile of our units are, and we know what the benefits here are going to be. We don't have any type of situational question or gameplay element. It's just math for the most part on these guys. So it's easy to compare. The 2 defensive Hive Fleets are Leviathan, which says roll a d6 each time a unit with this adaptation loses a wound whilst it's within 6 inches of a friendly synapse unit from the same Hive Fleet. On a 6, the damage is ignored and the unit does not lose a wound. Ignore this adaptation on any unit that is currently affected by the Catalyst psychic power, which basically gives a 5-up feel no pain. So essentially, if you're in synapse range, or actually closer than synapse, but if you're near a synapse creature for a Leviathan unit, you get a 6-up feel no pain. And then the other defensively geared Hive Fleet is Gunder, which says a unit with this adaptation, other than units that can fly, always has the benefit of cover for the purposes of shooting attacks. If the unit advances or charging, however, it loses the benefit of this adaptation until the start of your next movement phase. So basically improving your armor save by 1 for anything that doesn't have fly and doesn't advance or charge. So a pretty universal benefit. Now, if we want to know which one of these 2 is going to be more beneficial on a average basis, assuming that you're able to apply both of them, so we're talking about units that are within range of a synapse creature and also units that are not flying or advancing or charging, anything like that. If we're comparing those as is, The math works out pretty straightforward, and it's actually quite surprising in some ways. I would think there would be some cases where being Leviathan would be more beneficial than Jormungandr, but that's actually not the way it works. Jormungandr is almost always more beneficial. In fact, on a mathematical basis, it is always more beneficial just because it improves your armor save by 1, and that's often a lot better than just having a 1/6 chance to save a wound. So for both of these adaptations, they become more effective the worse your armor save is. So if you have an army full of 5-up, 6-up save models, either one of these are going to have a huge impact on the longevity of your army, but relative to each other, Jormungandr is going to be the more beneficial choice. For a 6-up save, it doubles your longevity. You go from a 6-up save to a 5-up save, and yeah, this is assuming no AP, weapons are being shot, things like that. But even if you take AP into account, you're still better off with Jormungandr. And so, yeah, if you had an army full of 6-up models, you're doubling the number of wounds effectively that you have against bolter fire. So if you're bringing a 2,000 point list, you really have like a 4,000 point list defensively. So that's important to keep in mind. And similarly for Leviathan, it's like you have a 3660 list. So that's a notable increase in durability, but durability itself is not necessarily going to win you games. So keep that in mind. I like both of these adaptations. I think Jormungandr is a solid pick all around, and one of the top 4 adaptations, I would say, out of all the Hive Fleets. So Jormungandr, really strong. The offensively melee-focused Hive Fleets are a bit more numerous. You have Behemoth, which says you can reroll failed charge rolls for units with this adaptation. I don't think I have to say that that's a very strong adaptation. One of the big challenges with melee-oriented armies is just getting into combat. Once you get into combat, you have a lot better chance of surviving and doing your damage, but making those charges is critical. And yes, you can compensate for charge range by getting in close and being fast, and the Tyranids are fast, but being able to reroll charge rolls really gives you a consistency that you can depend on. So that's a really advantageous Hive Fleet. Again, top 4 Hive Fleet adaptations. Kraken says when a unit with this adaptation advances, roll 3 dice instead of 1 and pick the highest to add to your move characteristic. In addition, such units can fall back and charge in the same turn. This is awesome, assuming you get into combat. And being able to advance 3d6 is awesome. It helps make sure that you're going to get into combat, especially with units like Gene Stealers, which can advance and charge in the same turn. You can also do that with Psychic Powers. But this ability, I think, is also top 4. Very strong, allows you to get into combat, and then you can do all sorts of really cool tricks with jumping in and out of combat. You can charge, do your damage, then the next turn, jump out, fire your weapons at that target, then charge back in. All sorts of cool things with Carnifexes, which we'll talk about later, of course, doing mortal wounds on the charge, and other units have abilities that proc on the charge, like a Harpy. So having the ability to exit and enter combat in the same turn, that's really good if you can build your list around it. Gorgon says you can reroll wound rolls of 1 in the fight phase for units with this adaptation. That's anytime that you can reroll wounds is great. I just don't see this being as universally applicable as some of these other ones, because again, it doesn't address getting into combat. A lot of your units are going to do fine in combat as long as you get them there, and the re-rolling 1s to wound is not necessarily that big of a deal compared to these other adaptations that enhance your ability to get into combat in the first place. So good, but not top 4 in my opinion. And then the last melee-focused Hive Fleet is Hydra. It says you can reroll hit rolls in the fight phase for units with this adaptation that target units containing fewer models than their own. That on itself is good. So you'd want to use this with a swarm army. So if you're bringing multiple units of 30 gaunts, that is going to be a good adaptation for you because you're going to be able to consistently use it. But realistically, I don't see that's going to happen. I think a lot of units are going to be smaller than 30 gaunts. You're going to have single model units like Hive Tyrants and Carnifexes and all sorts of stuff like that. And so you can use this, and it's going to be good if you do use it and build your army around it. But again, I think your army's going to be challenged if you build your list around this, just because you're going to be passing up some really nice things. So good, but probably, I don't know, maybe the weakest of the Hive Fleets. Definitely not top 4. And then Chronos is the shooting-oriented Hive Fleet, and it is definitely in the top 4. So it says you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for units with this adaptation in your shooting phase if they do not move in the preceding movement phase. On first glance, that's rough for an army that is going to be mobile and everything like that, but keep in mind you can have a specific detachment dedicated to Chronos. So put all your shooting bugs in a separate detachment, give them the Chronos adaptation, and they're going to be that much better. So I really like this. It has some cool traits along with it that are anti-psyker that make it very strong as well. So Chronos, definitely in the top 4, really giving you a little bit more reliability with your shooting, plus some other goodies, which we'll talk about later. Alright, so I'm not going to talk about stratagems, but I will talk about bioartifacts and warlord traits just because they're a little bit more well confined. We'll talk about stratagems as a whole in a different video. Alright, so starting with Chameleon Ik Mutation, this is the Kraken relic or bioartifact. It allows you to basically subtract 1 for all hit rolls against your warlord. That's really nice, especially on a character that has 10 or more wounds. So on a Hive Tyrant, it's going to serve you very well. Smaller wounded models, so things like a Broodlord or a Neurothrope, if those are your warlord, having the Kraken bioartifact is not going to help you as much just because they're benefiting from being a character in the first place. So putting this on a Hive Tyrant, especially an aggressive Hive Tyrant, maybe like something with Devourers or a close combat oriented Hive Tyrant, is going to serve you very well. Hyperadaptive Biology is a Gorgon trait. It says from the end of the first phase in which this model suffers any wounds, add 1 to its toughness for the remainder of the battle. That's good. It's not as good as it would have been in previous editions where toughness was more valuable. Now that it's the you have to double out on toughness before you actually affect the wound roll to get it to be a 6. That is less impressive, but if you put it on the right warlord, it can make a difference between hitting on 3s or 4s or 5s on common weapons. So, if you're at toughness 7 and you bump it up to 8, that means Malta is hitting on or wounding you on 4s now instead of on 3s. So it does have some nice applications. It's just fairly situational. Slayer Sabers are a Leviathan model with monstrous bone swords. They are melee weapons with strength user -2 AP doing 3 damage. And a model with the Slayer Sabers can make 1 additional attack with them in the fight phase. In addition, if an infantry or biker model suffers damage from this weapon but is not slain, roll a d3 at the end of the fight phase. If the result is greater than that model's remaining number of wounds, it is slain. That's pretty good, but it's good at face value, but I don't think it's going to actually come into play that often. You're going to have to be fighting characters basically, since it does 3 damage to begin with. There aren't that many models in the game that have more than 3 wounds and are infantry or a biker. So it's good, but it's not amazing. Fairly situational. Slimer Maggot Infestation is a replacement for a model with 2 Despoters. Range 24, Assault 6, Strength 7, AP -1, 1 damage. You can reroll failed wound rolls with this weapon. I mean, I think that one's actually fairly good. Anytime you can re-roll wound rolls, that's not bad at all. Especially for something that's Strength 6. Going against vehicles especially is going to be really useful to reroll wounds. Going against infantry is going to be less useful, but against vehicles this is going to be a lot better. So I like that. That's pretty good. The Bale Thorn Cannon is for Chronos. It replaces a Stranglethorn Cannon, range 36, assault d6, strength 7, -1 AP and 2 damage. And you can add 1 to hit rolls for this weapon when attacking a unit with 10 or more models. And here's the key part. You can't take invulnerable saves against it. So I really like this for facing demons or other invuln save heavy armies. It can do fairly well, I think. So a bit of a niche application, so again a little situational, but it's not completely situational. You still get the benefit of the gun against any target. You just get to really capitalize on the invulnerable save benefit against things like demons or whatever. So this is something that's going to do fairly well at plinking away at these demon Primarchs that are currently quite a bit to handle. So like that sounds pretty good. Let's see. The Infrasonic Roar is the Jormungandr monster only. Enemy units within 6 inches must subtract 1 from their leadership. I mean, that's good, but that's good. And in the morale phase, that's really useful. You can stack that with the horror and really start to make some things happen. But I don't know. I don't think that's going to be winning games for you. I think it's just kind of a nice perk in general, but it's not going to make or break very many situations. I think you're generally either going to roll over somebody or not. And if you have the -1 leadership, that helps sometimes, but more often you're going to be kind of in that binary state. It's not going to be in that gray zone in the middle where that -1 leadership is going to make a huge difference. Yeah, okay, cool. Oh, we almost forgot about the size of Tyran. I knew I was missing something. So the size of Tyran, they are the Behemoth artifact, and they replace monstrous scything talons, range melee, type melee, strength +1, AP -3, 3 damage, and you can make an additional attack. In addition, every time you hit on a 6+, you make an additional roll, and you can't proc that off of procs. It's just that one tier of benefit. But I think this is really nice for like a Broodlord or something. A close combat oriented Warlord obviously is going to benefit from this. I really like it. I think it's a really nasty artifact, and if you're going Behemoth, that you're not only going to have the benefit of making your charges, but when you get there, you're going to just rip people apart with your Warlord, which is sweet. So, pretty darn good. Warlord Traits Behemoth is Monstrous Hunger. Each time you take a wound, roll of a 6+ for the Warlord in the fight phase. That attack inflicts 1 additional damage. So, when you're in close combat, you're doing 1 additional damage on top of that. Really just laying down the hurt. It makes Behemoth a really consistent force for taking out multi-wound models, and yeah, I think that's really good. Makes Behemoth overall a very strong choice. Kraken, 1 step ahead. Each fight phase, you can pick 1 friendly unit within 6 inches of your Warlord. That unit can fight first, even if it didn't charge. So this is really nice for Kraken because even though Kraken can fall back and then recharge, it's pretty nice. And I guess I just in saying that, when I talked about the Kraken ability, it's important to note that you can only fall back, shoot, and recharge if you have the fly keyword or some other ability. But yeah, the fly keyword, so flying units are going to be able to fall back, shoot, and charge back in. Other things are just going to fall back and then charge back in because, you know, obviously if you fall back, you can't shoot unless you have the fly keyword. So, but for this Warlord trait, it allows you to keep a unit in combat and allow them to still fight first. So, you know, you can take all your units that have fly, have them fall back. They can shoot at other targets, do their business, and then use this Warlord trait on, you know, a unit of Gene Stealers or something in combat with that unit. And then in the fight phase, everybody charges back in, and the Gene Stealer unit they used it on still gets to fight first. You don't have to worry about them getting taken out in the fight phase at all. So this is just a nice kind of band-aid or bootstrap to help keep your guys fighting first without having to deal with Overwatch again, which, you know, Overwatch isn't necessarily going to make a huge difference, but it's better to avoid that if you can. So, yeah, I think that's a nice Warlord trait. Leviathan, once per battle, you can reroll a single hit, wound, damage, charge, or saving throw roll made by your Warlord. So it's a free reroll, command point reroll. So that saves you, you know, what, 5, 6, 4 command points, which is, you know, not bad, right? That's nice. I like that. You know, if it's between taking that and nothing, absolutely, right? Gorgon, at the end of the fight phase, roll a d6 for each enemy unit within 1 inch of the Warlord. On 4+, they suffer a mortal wound. That's pretty subpar, I think, just because you have to get into combat. So, you know, you might be missing, you know, one application of that at least. And then it's within 1 inch. So you have to be in combat with them. Your Warlord, you know, depending on the size of the model, it's going to be hard to get it into combat with multiple units potentially. So, you know, at most you're getting a few mortal wounds out of this, which, you know, there are definitely worse things, but you know, I think it's kind of situational, a little bit hard to apply in practice. Jormungandr, enemy units never gain the benefit of cover for your Warlord or units within 3 inches of the Warlord. That's pretty nice. Basically increases the AP of your weapons by 1 against things that are in cover. And that, you know, if you have a unit of 30 Devil Gaunts or something, that's going to add up real quick. So that benefit is pretty decent. I think that's a pretty solid choice. Hydra, at the beginning of each of your turns, roll a dice for each wound that your Warlord has lost. For each roll of a 6, your Warlord regains a lost wound. That's pretty good as well. The main thing here is, of course, that you can do it, you know, for a wound lost on turn 1 on turn 6. So you just keep getting that benefit. So it, you know, potentially allows you, you know, for your Warlord to become stronger as the game goes on, if it doesn't take, you know, a ton of wounds. So that's not bad. I like that. And I guess I should rephrase that, not necessarily stronger, but, you know, if he takes a bunch of damage at turn 1 and then is left alone, he can kind of get back up to full strength by the end of the game potentially. Yeah, that's not bad. I like that. In addition to Catalyst, having Catalyst end this, that gives you a pretty good shot at staying in the game. Whenever enemy Psyker fails a psychic test within 18 inches of a Chronos Warlord, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. Dang, that's nice. You know, especially for a mobile Warlord, so something like a Winged Hive Tyrant, you're going to be able to position that in a way that you're going to actually be able to use that Warlord trait. It's going to be harder with something like a Neurothrope that's slower, but having a Winged Hive Tyrant or some other mobile Warlord with Chronos, you're going to be able to really lay down some hurt for Psyker intensive armies. And there's a few. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about stratagems. There's a Chronos stratagem that allows you to force your opponent to use only 1 die to make a psychic test. So you're almost guaranteeing that a lot of psychic powers are not going to go off. So you can use that right away, and then you could do something you can modify their rolls as well. So with like Shadow and the Warp. So that is a pretty nice Warlord trait if your opponent has Psychers. If you're facing Tau, it doesn't matter at all. So keep that in mind. That said, of course, Tau are not a meta competitive army really right now. There are some lists out there that are going to do fairly well, but for the most part, I think Psychers are a pretty important part of the meta right now. So this is a pretty useful trait. All right. Yeah, so I think that's everything I want to talk about right now about the basics of this book, about the Hive Fleet adaptations. And overall, I think the top four are Behemoth, Jormungandr, Kraken, and Chronos. Personally, I'm looking at doing a mixture of Kraken and Chronos, potentially switching that out to Behemoth if my initial runs don't work out well. But Kraken and Chronos seem to give you a really nice mix of aggressive close combat stuff and also some support for limited shooting and also some psychic dominance, which again, like I mentioned, I think is an important part of the meta right now. So being able to really hammer enemy psychers and then just nom them all up with the Kraken melee units, a bunch of Gene Steal or something like that is, I think, going to be a really nice list. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Before I go, there's a few things I want to talk about just related to the channel, so stick with me. The first thing is I really want to thank Commissar Hecht for sending me this book. Thank you very much. If you guys haven't checked out his channel, please go ahead and do so. There will be a link in the description below. The second thing is that I'm sorry for the delay in getting this out. Basically, my computer died. My technical drone activated savior protocols and blue screened on me a little bit over a week ago, and the process of getting back up and going has been lengthy. So we are back up and running, so thank you for sticking with me. Like I said, let me know what you think in the comments below about these Hive Fleet adaptations, what you're looking forward to most in this codex, what units are most appealing to you, and yeah, we can talk about those going forward. So thanks for watching and happy wargaming.